Alright, so in this video what we're going to be doing is discussing the select API from Material UI, and while you're here, you might as well subscribe like all that other good stuff because I'm going to be putting out more content. Recently I just moved and got a dog, so that's been taking up a bit of my time, and also I have a full-time job, but I do enjoy doing this, so feel free to add any requests below, and feel free to participate because I'm going to be doing this for quite a while. So let's come in here. And let's first look what we have here at the top. Now feel free to pause the video because I just got tired of typing all those import statements in. I think it's boring. So go ahead and get those in, or just feel free to watch along. And what we're going to do is make some selects. So think of a box with an arrow. You click it, options drop down, you select one, you go on your merry way. The thing with the Material UI documentation is that there's so many options of what you could do. When you look at their sample code, it's a lot of the same code over and over and over and over again. And because certain features aren't always located in the same areas, and rightfully so, and logically so, it is a bit hard to know kind of what's going on as everything kind of looks the same. So what I'm going to do is make a base select component here, and then I've made some notes on another screen, and then we're going to go through and edit it as we go along, so you just kind of see one solid component and the things you could do with it. So let's get moving. So we're gonna make some form control here, and there are some things I'm gonna have to go back and redo as errors pop up that I know are gonna happen, to show you some kind of things that you need to know that may not be as explicit in the documentation. So we have our form control, which is like our parent wrapper here. We're going to come in and have our input label. And what we're going to put here for this is, let's see, most Florida thing. I think Florida is an interesting state. I'm from the Midwest myself, but I've been to Florida a few times, and I think it's a very, very interesting area. So, plus I like all the ridiculously weird stories that come out of there. So let's come in and give this a label ID. Let's call this select demo here. We'll give it a regular ID. Call it Florida select. And to help us out here, what we're going to need is something that will manage the state for us. So when we select something or change something, that everything kind of responds in sync together. And so we're going to need to use React's hook called useState. And so let's come in here, and we'll make it in just a minute, and we'll just call value, we'll make that as value right here. And then for onChange, which takes place immediately after we select the thing that we want, this is going to fire off and send our information to the function to update the state here. We're going to call this handle change. And if you were to go into the documentation, you would see that my example and the Material UI example is insanely similar, and that's fine. There's no big deal there, but you know, some people are just visual learners. And I've actually been liking the react.useState rather than importing it here at the top right after React. I think it's a little bit cleaner. I think I might start doing that in my future projects. Now we're going to make handle change, which is going to take the event, set value. It's going to take that event. And when I first started doing this a long time ago, I was kind of like, what the hell is this event.target.value? Can't you just give me the event and everything in here? But what you're setting up, I believe, is a synthetic event, which has a bunch of properties on it. And so you're going to have to get that target property, which then is going to reference the value, which is indeed the menu item value that you're sending in through this kind of like form control process up here. So release the select when you use it. So I know it's kind of weird looking, but you'll memorize it in no time if you do this enough. So we're going to come down here, we're going to make some menu items. I don't know if it's me, I'm a bad typer, because on my work computer I'm much more smooth at this, so I wonder if I just have a somewhat unresponsive keyboard here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put in here some menu items that remind us or are the most Florida thing. So from a documentary I saw, I'm going to put down O.J. Simpson, because after his fall from grace he was selling oranges at some intersection, and he would say to people, "You got juiced," or whatever. It was pretty ridiculous. Florida Man, because Florida Man's always had it. Bath salts, which is the food of choice by Florida Man, and drive-through alligators. And this isn't enough right here. This will show these options to us, but the issue is that we need some kind of value in here. I wish it would stop highlighting there, to send and set as the value that we selected. And so we have to come in here, and I'm just going to do this process. There's probably a much faster way of doing this, but I don't have it set up on this. So we're basically going to copy and paste these options here. I know some of these are wacky. When I was learning French years ago, I would try and memorize the language and the grammar and all that using jokes, because that's what was most memorable to me, and that's how it got to stick for so long. So we're going to do something here, and then we're going to see something we don't like. And then the first thing is an error here. And so what it's saying is undefined is not a function, and that's because I was dumb and did not give a default value there. So we see most Florida thing, and it kind of works, right? But this looks like garbage, and this is kind of one of the gotchas from the documentation that I don't really like, but it's something that we just kind of have to put up with. And so we have to come up here and do use styles, make styles, and then we come down in here, and we're going to make something called form control, which I don't know why it did that for me. Once again, this is nearly identical to the documentation. We're going to have the margin, and this is just for some minor spacing here to make it look a little bit better. But this isn't the big one. The big one right here is minimum width. And so I'm going to set it to 200. They have it 120 in the documentation. And so I saved that, and then I have to come back down into the form control itself. And I'm getting ahead of myself here because I have to bring in it from up above. And so we see now that this actually takes up the 200 pixels minimum there. So that is kind of one weird gotcha. I wish you didn't have to come up here and type all this out. It makes sense that you have to. I get it. It's just kind of weird. If you're like, okay, I don't want to use any of their styles, you're kind of forced into having to do some editing off the bat, which sucks. But we could come in here and we could type, you know, Florida Man, most Florida thing, O.J. Simpson, drive-through alligators, bath salts, and that all works. And that's super cool, and that is pretty much the most basic kind of edit that you can make. So the next one we're going to look at is the one where we have a like helper text below. And that is very, very, very easy to do. So what we're going to do is come below here. And what we see now is this helper text says select most Florida thing. And so we'll still have our results up here that the user could select, but this will help kind of guide their eyes of like, okay, most Florida thing, what does that mean to me? But down here you'll have a little bit of a guidance that says, what does this mean to you? And whenever you're helping out a user in any way, even if you think you're giving options to users that make a lot of sense, not everyone comes to your website knowing what things mean, and sometimes they're using reading assistants and other kinds of technology, so you may have to be like overly explicit. So this form helper text is something that you should not overlook by any means. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have an empty placeholder. So say you want to have something here, but you don't want any real kind of value. You'd be more than able to do that. We could come in here, but then the next thing that we should do, let me just show you this off the bat. So we have this right here, so that way we could have like an empty kind of label there. But the next thing that we want to do with this is we want to come down into our select, and we want to do display empty. And this kind of sucks because this is showing our empty menu item right here off the bat, but as you can see, it jams into this, and that is extremely ugly and no one wants to look at that. So where you should go next is actually come up here to your input label and type in shrink. And so as before, when we would select something, it would move this text up above. Shrink says, hey, out of the gate, just put it up here. And then we'll be able to come through and select these options as is. So that's pretty cool. So the next thing that we could do is we could also disable our select as well. And that is not too hard to do either. We just have to come up here in a form control. And then we type, I wish I could type this in myself on days I don't want to work, but we come up here, and now this is totally inaccessible to us. And sometimes you want to have that, because if the user makes an option or a choice previously in the form or elsewhere on the page, you may want to lock them into a decision or not allow them to edit something because it may not make sense on the business side to have two competing options for them to select. So that's pretty easy right there. And so the next thing that we want to do is, well, what if we want to make an error appear? And we just type the word error straight into form control, and that is pretty simple right there. We type it up, and now that it is red. And so this is, if we see here, if true, it'll be displayed in an error state. So what you could do is you could use another use state up here or some other kinds of logic where if they select something that's incompatible with previous choices, or say even they're trying to navigate to the next page and you're like, wait, hold up a second, I need you to actually give me a non-empty option, you could highlight this in red, and you could even make the helper text or something else in here dynamic that says, yo, you need to select a valid option before continuing. And that's pretty easy to do. So the next thing what we want to do is we want to make something read only. So sometimes maybe you're going back through, you're looking at a form, but it's what you've already entered in and you don't want to change anything. Some websites are like that. You just can't do anything unless you go like click back 100,000 times. Sometimes you just want to show them what they've entered before a full submission. And so that's not too hard to do either. So we could come into here and we'll go into the input props. And if you watch my other tutorials, you've seen this before. We'll go to read only. We'll set this to true. And so if we're looking at this right here, we could see that we can't really do much with this because it's read only. We can't select anything. And I know right now that kind of sucks because, you know, nothing fun is selected on here. But if you just wanted to have it be in the state, you're going to have to inject this property or this like object into whatever the selector renders on the screen, because that's what input props is doing. Now the next thing that we may want to do is use this thing called auto width, which is kind of cool here. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down and select, we're going to do auto width. If you're wondering like what is, you know, let's look at that. All right, fine. Get an image in your head. Let's comment this out. Well, that looks kind of strange. So what is it doing? And so if we go to the documentation, it says for auto width, and it's a Boolean. It says if true, the width of the popover will automatically be set according to the items inside of the menu. Otherwise, it will be at least the width of the select input. So if we come in here and do auto width, and let's just play with it here. Maybe in our example it doesn't really show much. But that is the auto width feature right there. Some of these things I find maybe it's how I have them set up, but some of the attributes are either sometimes so minute it doesn't really matter if you use them or not, but also in other instances you're probably going to have other overriding CSS styles anyways, so auto width may not be as impactful, you know, as I've just shown on the screen here. So no worries there. So if we're scrolling down, well, I think we're entering some of the last few here that they have. And so one of them is a filled look here. And so let's look at this. If we're going to come down in here, let's go into the input props. Once again, just copying this from the documentation. We have display empty up here, which is awesome. But then one thing that we may want to do is we want to add another class in here. And we're going to have to go back and make this too. Selected empty. So we're going to come on up here. We're going to add another style up here. We'll call it selected empty. And so for this one right here, this is another one of those where I was looking at it and I was thinking to myself in the example, like, what is it are they really trying to get at with this? Because looking at the display empty on there, the class name, the input props that they're using, you know, they did end up having this in here, which is kind of interesting. You could have the, you know, the empty, this be disabled here. And so you could have the OJ Simpson, you could have Florida Man, and this essentially eliminates the ability to use the default, which is empty here. I don't know if I would use this per se. I would rather just have them have the helper text, have the label above, and then have these options below. But this is just one of the examples they have of being able to select something without the first option being, you know, accessible. Once again, I'm not sure if I'm like the biggest fan of that or not, but that's just one of the options that you have. And so another thing we may want to do is we may want to make something required. And so let's come in here and we'll take this out. We'll take out disabled, so that way we kind of strip down as much as possible from the previous example. We'll save it again. And sometimes you want to make something required. And you basically just come up in here. Let's remove shrink, unless that causes, yeah, that causes an issue there. Let's put shrink back up in there. And so we have required here, and we notice that it puts this little like asterisk up here, which allows, you know, and denotes to the user that, hey, you really need to do this. Now, if you're giving a form to, you know, someone, you know, you could use that asterisk. I don't know how much meaning that's going to convey. There may be studies on that, but I'd be more in favor of, you know, having, say, you know, select most Florida thing, and then you could have, you know, required down there, right? Rather than this symbol, because this may not be universally known that, hey, I have to do this. And plus, if you try to go on, you could use that error attribute and turn this red, which I think may be a bit more useful. Now going into the last two, these are pretty straightforward here. And so one of them is to make an outline and then filled select. So variant, let's come in here and let's see if it's smart enough. So there'll be, let's do outlined, which looks pretty neat. You kind of are worrying about this line slicing through here, but you'd have to style that out a little bit differently, but that's one of the options that you have. And maybe you don't even want an input label there at all. It all really depends on kind of what you're going for. And so the last one I'm going to show is filled. And so that kind of takes everything and jams it in together here. And so everything is accessible as it is before, but it kind of has a bit more presence here. This looks more akin to maybe if you're doing like a tax form, a government form, or something a bit boring and dull, but it definitely has presence on the page. And that is, I know, at 22 some odd minutes, the select API. It's not completely exhaustive. I might do more dive-ins later, but this is everything in a row. So yeah, feel free to comment, like all the other stuff, and have a good one.